They told you Socrates was a philosopher. They told you he was wise, eccentric, the man who asked questions. But they didn't tell you the truth. They didn't tell you that Socrates was hated, despised, feared, and not because he was violent or greedy or corrupt, but because his very existence made people feel exposed. Socrates walked into the marketplace of Athens, opened his mouth, and suddenly men who pretended to be wise were revealed as fools. He didn't attack them with a sword. He didn't raise an army. He only asked questions. But those questions cut deeper than any blade. They exposed hypocrisy. They exposed cowardice. They exposed lies. And here is the truth you've never been told. Socrates was killed not because he was dangerous to the city. He was killed because he was dangerous to the lie. And that makes him exactly like you. Imagine living in a city where everyone pretends to know, pretends to be virtuous, pretends to care, etc. That was Athens back then. And imagine a man who refuses to play along, a man who stripes away the masks, a man who sees through the falsehoods and asks questions no one else dares to ask. What is justice? What is virtue? What is truth? These questions embarrassed the powerful, they humiliated the proud, they disturbed the comfortable. And so the city turned against him. They accused him of corrupting the youth, of dishonoring the gods. But those weren't just excuses. The real crime of Socrates was existing in a way that reminded everyone else of their own cowardice. And isn't that your story too? Does it remind you of something? Think about your life. How many times have people turned against you, not because you heard them, but because you exposed them? How many times have you been excluded, not because you were wrong, but because you were right? Or too right in this case? How many times have you been punished, not because you lied, but because you refused to lie? This is why you have been targeted. This is why you've been misunderstood. Because just like Socrates, your life itself is a weapon against mediocrity. If you felt the sting of being hated for who you are, then you already carry the mark of the Catharsian. Join the others who refuse the hemlock. Join the Catharsians on Patreon now. Find the link in the description box. You've always felt it, haven't you? That rage in your chest, that fire that won't let you stay silent. It burns every time you see the hypocrisy of the world. It burns every time you're surrounded by people who pretend. It burns every time they try to force you into silence. That rage is not a flaw, it's the proof. Socrates had it too. The rage that wouldn't let him play along. The rage that wouldn't let him sit in silence while the whole city worshipped lies. And like you, he paid the price. He was mocked, he was ridiculed, and he was judged. Until finally they put him on trial. When you read about his trial, you refuse the official charges. He was accused of corrupting the youth. He was accused of not believing in the gods of the city. But do you really believe that's why they wanted him dead? Of course not. The trial was never about him. It was about what he represented. It was about what he forced people to see. It was about the truth he embodied, a truth so unbearable that the city would rather kill him than confront it. And that's what's happening to you. Your life has been a trial from the start. The whispers, the exclusions, the betrayals, those were your accusations. They didn't need to put you in a courtroom because society already sentenced you. Your crime, being too much like Socrates, being too much like truth. And just as Athens couldn't tolerate Socrates, the system cannot tolerate you. Don't make the mistake of thinking you're broken or there's something wrong with you. You are proof that the fire still lives. If you're ready to turn that fire into discipline, step onto the Pythagorean path, the first tier of the Catharsians on Patreon. Find the link in the description box. When they gave Socrates the cup of poison, he could have escaped. His students begged him to. They offered him safety, exile, a chance to live. But he refused because he understood something profound. His death would be a greater lesson than his life. His martyrdom would speak louder than any words he could say. And here's where your story collides with his. You too have been forced to drink poison, not the hemlock of Athens, but the poison of loneliness, rejection, silence. You've drunk years of betrayal, exclusion, misunderstanding, and yet you're still here. That's what makes you dangerous. That's why they can't stand you. You were supposed to die under the weight of that poison, but instead you survived. And survival means your martyrdom isn't finished, it's only beginning. You've asked yourself why. Why have you suffered more than others? Why have you felt more alone, more misunderstood, more exiled? It's not because you're cursed, it's because you're chosen. The weight you've carried, the fire you've borne, it's proof that your life has a purpose bigger than comfort, bigger than fitting in, bigger than blending into the faceless mass. Like Socrates, you were born to be hated. You were born to be exiled. You were born to be feared. Because truth always is. But here's the difference. Socrates was forced to die in silence. You don't have to. You can take your martyrdom and turn it into a weapon. You can turn your exile into power. You can turn your suffering into leadership. If you're ready to weaponize your rage instead of drowning in it, step into Diogenes' barrel, where exile is no longer a wound, it's the throne. Find the link in the description box. They killed Socrates because he reminded them of their chains, and they'll do the same to you unless you understand the game. The Athenians said they valued justice. They built courts, they made laws, they called themselves civilized. But when a man stood in front of them with a truth sharper than their laws, what did they do? They condemned him. Because justice in the hands of the system is never about truth, it's about survival. It's about preserving the structure, the hierarchy, the illusion. And when you live in this world, you already know that's true. How many times have you seen liars rewarded while truth tellers are destroyed? How many times have you seen hypocrites promoted while the honest are cast aside? How many times have you swallowed your fire just to survive another day? You've seen it with your own eyes. The world is not built on justice. The world is built on fear. And like Socrates, you've been punished, not for your crimes, but for your courage. You've always been different. Even as a child, you saw what others refused to see. You asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. You carried a fire you couldn't explain. And what happened? They tried to break you. They tried to silence you. They tried to humiliate you. Teachers called you difficult. Friends called you weird. Family called you too much. But what they really were saying was, you're too much like Socrates. And if you've ever wondered why your life feels heavier, harder, more painful than theirs, here is your answer. Because the system always targets the ones who don't fit. The system always punishes the ones who won't kneel. That's why you've suffered. Not because you're weak, not because you're broken, but because your very existence is rebellion. If you've ever felt crushed under the weight of being too much, it's because you are meant to carry that fire into power. Begin now with the Pythagorean path on Patreon and turn pain into strength. Join the Pythagorean path on Patreon now. Find the link in the description box. Socrates lived in Athens but never truly belonged to Athens. He walked their streets, spoke their language, breathed their air, but he wasn't one of them. And you felt the same. You live in this world, but you've never belonged to it. You've gone to their schools, worked in their jobs, smiled at their rituals, but deep down, you've always known you were an exile. That exile isn't proof that something is wrong with you. It's proof that something is very right with you. Because the people who belong to the system are placeholders. They exist to maintain the machinery. They're not supposed to ask questions. They're not supposed to see the truth. But you were never ordinary. You were born to carry the fire that makes the system tremble. And exile is the mark of the chosen. You're a Catharsian. If you've been excluded, rejected, cast aside, it's because you've already proven you're not one of them. Inside the Catharsians on Patreon, exile is no longer a punishment, it becomes initiation. If you're ready to wear your rejection as a crown, this is your place. Join the Catharsians on Patreon now. Find the link in the description box. The system has taught you to fear your rage. They've told you to calm down, to be polite, to be reasonable. They've told you anger is weakness. But Socrates didn't believe that, and neither should you. His questions were born from rage, rage at hypocrisy, rage at lies, rage at the emptiness of the so called wise. His fire was sacred, and so is yours. When you feel that fury rising in your chest, when you look at the world and feel disgust at its mediocrity, that is not proof you are broken. This is proof you're alive. That rage is your initiation. That rage is your inheritance. That rage is the voice of truth inside you that refuses to be silenced. Don't let your rage burn in isolation. Inside the Catharsians on Patreon, your fire becomes part of a movement. Join the Catharsians now on Patreon. Find the link in the description box. The truth is, the system doesn't fear violence. It doesn't fear chaos. It doesn't even fear death. What it fears is truth. Because truth makes people remember. Truth makes people question. Truth makes people wake up. And that's why it makes people uncomfortable. That's why Socrates had to die. Not because he was dangerous to Athens, but because he was dangerous to the illusion Athens lived on. And that's why they fear you. Because your very existence makes people remember. what they've tried so hard to forget. Because when you refuse to kneel, you remind them that they are indeed kneeling. Because when you refuse to play along, you expose the hollowness of the game. You are living proof that another way exists, and that is what terrifies them. If you know you were born to be feared, not because of violence, but because of truth, then it's time to claim your throne inside the Aurelius Council. Join the Aurelius Council on Patreon now. Find the link in the description box. Every Carthasian faces the same choice Socrates faced. You can drink the poison and disappear quietly, hoping the world will leave you alone, or you can rise. You can take your exile and make it your crown. You can take your rage and make it your weapon. You can take your martyrdom and make it your legacy. Socrates never had the choice. His story ended with hemlock, but yours doesn't have to. The system has already judged you guilty. Guilty of being different, guilty of being real, guilty of being too much, guilty of being truth in human form. But you still have one decision left. Will you kneel or will you rise? The Catharsians are rising. Don't let your fire die in silence. Join the Catharsians today on Patreon. Find the link in the description box. When the cup of poison was placed before him, Socrates could have refused. He could have escaped into exile. His followers had planned everything. The gates were open, the road was clear, and his friends begged him to run. But he didn't. Why? Because Socrates understood something most people never will. There are lives not worth living. There are paths not worth walking. There are chains not worth carrying. To live in silence, pretending to be ordinary, was worse than death. To kneel before mediocrity, to obey a lie, to betray his fire, this was poison long before the hemlock touched his lips. So he drank, not as a victim, but as a weapon. His death was a sword that pierced through centuries. His silence that day spoke louder than any speech. And in that moment, he became eternal. You're not watching this video because you're ordinary. You're not watching this because you want comfort, safety, or permission to blend in. You are here because you have already been poisoned, not with hemlock, but with betrayal, with misunderstanding, with years of being cast aside, judged, mocked, excluded. That was your trial. That was your verdict. That was your execution. And yet, you didn't die. That's the difference. That's why you're here. You've already endured everything they threw at you. You've carried the loneliness, the rage, the silence. You've walked through the desert of exile, and still you burn. And that means only one thing: you are ready. If you are ready to rise from victim to warrior, start with a discipline that turns rage into firepower. Begin your journey inside the Pythagorean path. Join the Pythagorean path on Patreon. Find the link in the description box. Do you ever wonder why your chest feels like it's on fire when you see the emptiness around you? Why you feel disgusted by mediocrity? Why you feel suffocated by the deadness of others? That is your proof. This is your inheritance. That is your sign that you were never meant to be one of them. Socrates felt it too. That fire that wouldn't let him rest, That anger that made him question everything, that rage that refused to let him accept the ordinary world. The system called it corruption, but in truth, it was freedom. And your rage is freedom too. It is the voice of your soul refusing the hemlock. Don't suppress it. Don't apologize for it. And don't waste it. Inside the Catharsians on Patreon, you won't hide your rage, you will weaponize it. If you're ready to turn your disgust at this world into unstoppable strength, this is where you belong. Join the Catharsians on Patreon now. Find the link in the description box. Nothing has changed since Athens. The system still fears what you are. It fears your questions. It fears your refusal to kneel. It fears your very existence. That's why you've been isolated. That's why they've tried to break you. That's why your life has felt like exile. Because they know if you ever gather with others like you, the illusion will collapse. They know if you ever rise together, the empire of lies will burn. They know if you ever lead, the placeholders will tremble. This is why they have targeted you from the beginning, because your life is a threat. If you know leadership is your destiny, if you know you were born to command, then step into the Aurelius Council. This is where Catharsians rise as leaders. Join now from the link in the description box. Socrates didn't get to choose his ending. He was forced to drink the poison. But you have a choice. The world has already judged you. It has already condemned you. It has already told you that you don't belong. And that's right, you don't. But what happens next is in your hands. You can keep drinking their poison every day, pretending to be smaller, silencing your fire, living like a ghost in a world that hates you. Or you can rise. You can take your exile and make it your crown. You can take your rage and make it your weapon. You can take your martyrdom and make it your destiny. The choice is before you. The world will never give you permission to be who you are. It will never reward you for your fire. It will never honor your truth. But you were never meant to wait for permission. You were meant to take it. That's why the Catharsians exist, to gather the exiles, to weaponize the rage, to turn suffering into power. The three paths are open before you. The Pythagorean path, where you begin with fire, with discipline, with practices that anchor your soul in power. Diogenes' barrel, where exile is no longer a wound, where you turn rejection into strength. The Aurelius Council, where leaders are forged, where the fire of the few reshapes the world of the many. Whichever you choose, don't hesitate. The hemlock is already at your lips. The poison is already flowing in your life. But you don't have to die in silence. You can rise in fire. Join the Catharsians today. Step into the path of those who refuse to kneel. Choose fire. Choose exile. Choose power. Choose leadership. Join the Catharsians on Patreon now from the link in the description box. They killed Socrates because he was too much like you. They feared him, mocked him, silenced him, and finally executed him. And they will do the same to you unless you rise. Your rage is memory. Your exile is proof. Your suffering is initiation. You were never ordinary. You were never meant to fit in. That's why you feel you don't belong here, because you don't. Don't waste another second drinking their poison. This is your moment, your trial, your destiny. Choose your path now. Join the Catharsians on Patreon and turn your exile into power.